December 19th, 1940. The sun beats down on Consolidated Aircraft's sprawling outdoor assembly facility in San Diego, California, where Charles Sorensen stands watching skilled craftsmen construct B-24 Liberators using methods that date back centuries. The temperature hovers near 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Metal expands in the relentless heat. Wooden jigs warp under California sunshine that bakes the tarmac and distorts the temporary frameworks holding bomber components. And aircraft take approximately 30 days to complete, one at a time, using techniques that would feel familiar to 19th-century shipwrights. Sorensen, Ford Motor Company's production chief and the architect of automotive mass production, has spent 35 years transforming Henry Ford's visions into manufacturing reality. He pioneered the moving assembly line in August 1913 at Highland Park that revolutionized the automobile industry. He perfected synchronized production systems that allowed Ford to build a complete V8 automobile in less than 2 hours. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. He knows efficiency, he knows flow, he knows how to make complex products quickly. He earned the nickname Cast Iron Charlie for his revolutionary work developing Ford's V8 engine casting processes. But aircraft? That's different. Every aviation expert tells him the same thing. Airplanes aren't cars. Precision aerospace engineering requires craft tradition accumulated across generations. Each bomber needs individual attention from skilled workers who understand the art of aircraft construction. Speed and quality cannot coexist in airplane manufacturing. The comparison isn't just inappropriate, it's insulting to men who've dedicated their lives to aviation. Sorensen has traveled to California with Edsel Ford, Henry's only son and president of Ford Motor Company since 1919. Edsel, 47 years old, elegant, cultured, and increasingly trapped between his aging father's stubbornness and the nation's wartime needs, watches the same outdoor assembly process with growing concern. The United States government wants Ford to build components for Consolidated's B-24 program, but Sorensen sees immediately that Ford-built precision parts won't fit into airplanes, assembled under these conditions, where heat distorts frameworks and outdoor weather affects tolerances. What catches Sorensen's particular attention isn't the workers, or even the bombers themselves. It's a wooden frame sitting in the brutal sunshine, literally baking at temperatures that would make a car's interior unbearable. A temporary jig, custom-built for this specific B-24's center wing section. The structure holds wing components in precise alignment, while workers rivet aluminum skin to internal stringers and spars. It takes 250 man-hours to assemble one center wing using this method. Then the jig gets dismantled carefully to avoid damaging the finished wing. Then another custom jig gets built for the next bomber, 250 hours, for one wing section, on one airplane, and Consolidated has built perhaps 7 complete B-24 seconds total, delivered just 3. Reuben Fleet, Consolidated's founder and president, a former Army aviation officer who founded the company in 1923, explains the process with evident pride. Each B-24 receives individualized attention, he says, like a bespoke suit tailored by London's finest craftsmen on Savile Row, like a Stradivarius violin handcrafted by Italian masters in Cremona. The temporary jig ensures perfect fit for each specific aircraft. No two bombers are exactly identical, Fleet explains, because aluminum sheets expand and contract, because tolerances vary slightly, because skilled craftsmen make micro-adjustments based on their experience and judgment. Sorensen asks a question that seems simple but contains profound implications. How do you build 1,000 bombers this way? Fleet's answer reflects conventional aerospace wisdom that nobody in the aviation industry questions. You hire more craftsmen. You expand the outdoor assembly areas. You open additional facilities. You accept that precision takes time. Quality cannot be rushed. The Army Air Forces needs bombers, certainly, but they also need bombers that actually fly, that return crews safely home, that don't fall apart under combat stress. Sorensen doesn't argue. He thanks Fleet for the tour. He and Edsel board their plane back to Detroit, but the problem gnaws at him like a splinter working deeper into flesh. The United States needs thousands of heavy bombers. Britain desperately needs American industrial capacity to replace catastrophic losses from German U-boats and Luftwaffe attacks. Consolidated can build perhaps one bomber per week using current methods. The mathematics of defeat are writing themselves in real time. That evening, December 27th, 1940, Sorensen checks into the Hotel del Coronado in San Diego, the iconic Victorian resort that opened in 1888. He orders room service. He tries to sleep. He cannot. His mind races through the problem that seems impossible to everyone except him. The problem isn't the B-24 Liberator itself. Consolidated's design is fundamentally sound. The Davis wing provides excellent range and payload capacity. The twin-tail configuration offers stability. The bomber can carry 8,000 pounds of bombs to targets German fighters cannot reach. The problem is thinking about the B-24 as a craft object instead of a manufactured product. Throughout the night, Sorensen sketches on Hotel del Coronado stationery, not aircraft drawings, production systems. He breaks the massive 4-engine bomber weighing 30 tons into major subassemblies. Nose section, cockpit and forward fuselage, center wing, outer wings, tail assembly, 4-engine nacelles. Each major subassembly breaks down further into smaller components. Wing ribs that define aerodynamic profile, spars that carry bending loads, stringers that support aluminum skin, control surfaces with their intricate hinge mechanisms. By dawn, the floor of his hotel room looks like a bomb hit it. Stacks of paper everywhere, each pile representing a distinct manufacturing operation, each stack showing how components could flow through coordinated production stations instead of sitting in outdoor sunshine waiting for custom jigs to be built around them. Buried in those stacks sits a single insight that will transform not just B-24 production, but aircraft manufacturing worldwide for the next 80 years. An insight so obvious once you see it that you wonder why nobody thought of it before. An insight that Consolidated's master craftsmen will initially call heresy, then study, then reluctantly copy. What if the jig didn't need to be temporary? What if the jig didn't need to be custom-built for each bomber? What if, instead of building a new wooden framework for every wing, you built one massive permanent steel jig that received wings, processed them with mechanical precision, and released them? February 1941. Ford Motor Company signs a contract to build complete B-24 Liberators, not just components. The United States government commits $200 million, approximately $3.6 billion in 2025 currency, to construct a factory designed by architect Albert Kahn on 975 acres of farmland near Willow Run Creek in Michigan. Sorensen begins translating his hotel room sketches into the largest manufacturing facility ever built under a single roof. The aviation establishment watches with skeptical amusement mixed with professional disdain. Ford has never built an airplane beyond a few experimental trimotors in the 1920s that failed commercially. Sorensen has never designed an aircraft factory. They're applying automobile thinking to precision aerospace engineering. The comparison is not just inappropriate, it's insulting. Dutch Kindleberger, president of North American Aviation, summarizes industry sentiment with a memorable quote that newspapers will repeat for years. You can't expect a blacksmith to make a watch overnight. The metaphor resonates throughout aerospace circles. Automobiles are simple. Airplanes are complex. Cars roll on roads. Bombers fly at 25,000 feet where mistakes kill 10-man crews. The skill sets don't translate. The manufacturing philosophies don't align. The experiment will fail. The only question is how much time and money get wasted before reality forces cancellation. April 1941. Construction begins on what will become 3.5 million square feet of manufacturing space, stretching nearly a mile in length. The main assembly building features 2 parallel production lines with an L-shaped configuration designed primarily to keep the entire facility within Washtenaw County for tax purposes, though Ford's public relations department emphasizes the engineering elegance instead. The unusual layout requires 4 massive turntables, each capable of rotating partially assembled B-24 fuselages, weighing several tons through 90 degrees near the end of the assembly process. 6 runways surround the complex, built on an adjacent 1,484 acres that Ford also owns. 3 massive hangars wait to receive finished bombers, the largest capable of housing 20 B-24 seconds simultaneously. The airfield includes a control tower, a cafe, and a hotel where Army Air Forces pilots will later sleep on 1,300 cots, waiting for bombers to roll off the line so they can ferry them to modification centers. The scale is unprecedented in American manufacturing. Albert Kahn, who designed automotive factories for Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, and Packard, calls Willow Run the most enormous room in the history of man. The main building alone measures 3,500 feet long and 1,280 feet wide. More than 2.5 million square feet of uninterrupted floor space under a single continuous roof, supported by massive steel trusses that eliminate interior columns. But the revolutionary element isn't the scale. Scale is just ambition made concrete and steel. The revolutionary element is buried in the engineering drawings for a specific production station deep inside the planned facility. The station for center wing assembly, the station that will either validate Sorensen's vision or prove Dutch Kindleberger correct about blacksmiths and watches. While the building rises from Michigan farmland where Henry Ford grew up and where his mother is buried, Sorensen's engineers study Consolidated's center wing assembly process in obsessive, exhaustive detail. They measure the temporary wooden jigs with precision instruments. They document every step workers perform, timing operations with stopwatches, photographing techniques, interviewing craftsmen. They calculate time requirements for each discrete operation within the larger assembly sequence. The data confirms what Sorensen observed in California. The temporary jig approach consumes 250 man-hours per wing and creates a bottleneck that will constrain the entire production sequence like a blood clot choking an artery. The permanent jig design that emerges from these studies during summer and fall 1941 is massive beyond anything traditional aircraft manufacturers can imagine. A steel framework standing 20 feet tall and extending 40 feet in length, weighing 27.5 tons, designed to be anchored directly to the factory floor with precision-machined mounting points that extend through concrete into bedrock. The structure features adjustable brackets and alignment pins machined to aircraft tolerances, capable of receiving a roughed-out wing assembly, holding it in exact 3-dimensional position with mechanical precision, and releasing it when complete. September 1942. The first B-24 rolls off Willow Run's assembly line after months of agonizing delays, frustrating setbacks, and mounting criticism from Washington. It took approximately 4 months to build, 120 days. Consolidated's experienced workers in California working in outdoor sunshine could have done better. Critics rename the facility Will It Run, deliberately mocking Sorensen's boast about producing 1 bomber per hour. Newspaper editorials question whether Ford Motor Company possesses the capability to manufacture precision aircraft at any speed, much less at automotive rates. The problems multiply faster than solutions emerge, piling up like cars in a highway accident. Consolidated hasn't provided complete engineering drawings because Consolidated doesn't work from complete engineering drawings. They build from sketches, templates, and institutional knowledge accumulated across years of aircraft production. Ford engineers work in rotating shifts around the clock, 7 days a week, producing approximately 5 miles of technical drawings daily, reverse engineering the B-24 from partial documentation and sample components. By the time Ford receives more accurate specifications, Consolidated has changed the design to incorporate combat lessons or Army Air Forces requirements. 10,000 of 30,000 engineering drawings become obsolete before the tooling gets manufactured and installed. The steel dies. Sorensen initially authorizes the same hardened steel type Ford uses to stamp automotive body panels with mechanical force, damage and deface the softer aluminum that comprises 85% of B-24 structure. The hard dies leave marks, distort skin panels, and create stress concentrations that could lead to catastrophic structural failures at altitude. Dies and machine tools get scrapped and redesigned at enormous cost. Millions of dollars wasted, Months of precious schedule lost, while German submarines sink Allied shipping faster than traditional shipyards can replace vessels. The wing assembly bottleneck emerges as the critical constraint choking production. Ford initially copies Consolidated's approach, building temporary wooden jigs for each center wing section, because that's how it's done, that's what aviation experts recommend, that's the proven method. The process remains stubbornly, maddeningly slow. Workers spend days constructing custom frameworks from dimensional lumber and steel brackets. The jigs hold wings during assembly, preventing distortion while riveters work. Then the jigs get carefully, laboriously dismantled to extract finished components without damage. Then the entire cycle repeats for the next bomber. At 250 man-hours per wing, Willow Run would need 250 separate wing assembly stations operating simultaneously, 24 hours daily, just to keep pace with Sorensen's promised rate of 1 bomber per hour. The station would occupy more floor space than the entire rest of the factory combined. The mathematics don't work, the physics don't work, the economics don't work. December 1942. Willow Run has produced exactly 56 B-24 seconds in its first operational year. Not 500, not even 100. 56 aircraft. Most unsuitable for combat operations because quality problems plague every airframe. They get relegated to training squadrons, reconnaissance patrols, and transport duties where mechanical failures won't directly kill crews in combat. Army Air Force's Chief General Hap Arnold, speaking confidentially to Charles Lindbergh, who's consulting at the plant despite controversy over his pre-war isolationist views and acceptance of Nazi Germany's Grand Cross of the German Eagle Medal, expresses combat squadron preferences bluntly. When we send B-17 seconds out on missions, most return. When we send Ford's B-24 seconds out, most don't. The reputation stings. Willow Run-built Liberators are viewed as inferior, products manufactured by workers who don't understand aircraft, assembled by secretaries and farmers and housewives instead of skilled craftsmen. Senator Harry Truman visits the plant in April 1942 and returns in February 1943, leading the Senate Special Committee to investigate the National Defense Program, charged with eliminating wartime production waste and profiteering. The committee has blood in its eye. They've seen too many defense contractors delivering substandard products at inflated prices, while American boys die using equipment that doesn't work. Truman stands in front of the wing assembly stations, watching workers construct temporary wooden jigs using hammers and saws like carpenters framing houses, and asks Sorensen a pointed question that cuts through technical excuses and corporate explanations like a hot knife through butter. Why are you building custom furniture for every bomber? The question hangs in the air like gun smoke. Sorensen has no good answer that will satisfy a no-nonsense former haberdasher from Missouri who ran an artillery battery in France during World War I. The truth is simple and damning, because that's how Consolidated does it, because that's how aircraft have always been built since the Wright brothers. Because the aviation industry insists that precision aerospace manufacturing requires custom jigs to ensure exact specifications for each individual airframe. Because every expert says so. Truman doesn't care about tradition. He doesn't care about industry standards accumulated over 40 years of aviation history. He doesn't care what experts say. He cares about finished bombers defending American soldiers and sailors dying in North Africa and the Pacific. The pressure intensifies like steam building in a boiler. Congressional critics demand cancellation of the Willow Run contract and redirection of resources to factories that actually produce flyable aircraft. Newspaper editorials question whether Ford Motor Company possesses the fundamental capability to manufacture precision aircraft at any speed. The investment of $200 million, the largest single defense plant expenditure in American history, appears headed toward catastrophic, humiliating failure. The blacksmith cannot make the watch. Kindleberger was right. The experiment has failed. But Edsel Ford refuses to quit, despite suffering from stomach ulcers that doctors suspect are stress-related, despite constant pressure from his aging father Henry, who has grown increasingly irrational after suffering strokes, Despite harassment from Harry Bennett, who runs Ford's violent service department enforcing Henry's wishes, Edsel pushes the Willow Run project forward. He meets with Sorensen daily. He reviews production reports. He mediates between the Army Air Force's changing requirements and Ford's manufacturing constraints. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The stress is literally killing him. In January 1942, Edsel undergoes surgery for stomach ulcers. Surgeons discover extensive metastatic stomach cancer during the operation. The cancer is inoperable, spread too far for surgical removal. Doctors give him months to live. Edsel continues working through 1942 and into 1943, driving to Willow Run, reviewing production issues, meeting with government officials. The enormous stress of the B-24 project undoubtedly accelerates his decline. March 1943. Sorensen, feeling the weight of Edsel's deteriorating health and Truman's criticism, retreats to his office and returns to the fundamental insight from his Hotel del Coronado sketches 2 years earlier. The jig doesn't need to move. The wing needs to move. What if the jig was permanent? What if it was massive enough to be structural instead of just supportive? What if it received wings that were pre-assembled elsewhere, rather than confining their construction? Ford engineers begin detailed design of a permanent steel jig for center wing assembly. The project receives absolute top priority. Every available engineer works on the problem. The structure must be massive enough to remain rigid under operational loads from hydraulic clamps and workers' weight. Precise enough to hold dimensions to within thousandths of an inch across a 40-foot span. Flexible enough to accommodate minor variations in pre-assembled wing structures, and fast enough to process one wing per hour without becoming the bottleneck. The final design stands 20 feet tall, extends 40 feet in length, weighs 27.5 tons, and costs approximately $50,000 to build, machine, and install. Heavy steel brackets create a three-dimensional template that defines exact wing position in space. Precision alignment pins, machined to aircraft tolerances and hardened against wear, guide wing structures into perfect position every single time. The entire apparatus gets anchored directly to the factory floor using massive foundation bolts that extend through concrete into Michigan bedrock. The design philosophy represents complete inversion of traditional thinking that will eventually influence manufacturing worldwide. Consolidated's temporary jigs were built around wings, custom-adapted to each airframe's unique characteristics. Ford's permanent jig receives wings that are built elsewhere and brought to it. The distinction transforms everything about aircraft manufacturing from that moment forward. Here's how the permanent jig system works in practice. In a separate pre-assembly area located away from the main production line, workers construct the center wing's internal skeleton on simple flat tables without confining frameworks. No temporary jig constrains access. Workers can approach from multiple angles. They can see what they're building. They can verify alignment using straightforward measuring tools. They position 14 major ribs that define the wing's aerodynamic profile. They install 2 massive spars, front and rear, that run the wing's entire 55-foot center span and resist bending loads during flight. They attach stringers, the longitudinal structural members that support aluminum skin panels and prevent buckling under stress. This rough assembly happens quickly because workers aren't fighting a temporary wooden framework. The process that took days inside Consolidated's custom jigs takes hours on Ford's flat assembly tables. When the rough assembly is complete, an overhead bridge crane with a 40-ton lifting capacity moves into position above the work area. Steel cables lower from the crane's trolley. Workers attach lifting slings to hardpoints built into the wing structure specifically for this purpose. The crane operator, following standard procedures and watching signals from ground crew, lifts the entire structure smoothly, steadily upward. The wing weighs approximately 4,500 pounds, manageable for the crane but requiring precision control. The crane transports the wing structure across the factory floor to the permanent jig station, following alignment marks painted on concrete. Workers at the jig station prepare to receive the wing, verifying that alignment pins are properly positioned, that brackets are correctly adjusted, that the jig is ready for the next assembly. The crane operator, using precision controls and following hand signals from spotters, positions the wing structure above the permanent jig's open framework. Slowly, watching alignment pins approaching matching holes in the wing's structure, the operator lowers the wing into the jig's embrace. Steel brackets guide the wing into position like a ship entering dry dock. Alignment pins slide through mounting holes with clearances measured in thousandths of an inch, so precise that even small misalignments prevent engagement. The wing settles into the jig, held absolutely stable in three-dimensional space by the massive steel framework. Inside the permanent jig, workers perform final assembly operations that transform the rough wing skeleton into a completed structural component. They verify that all 14 ribs align perfectly with reference points built into the jig's structure. They check that leading edge and trailing edge contours match aerodynamic specifications. They install remaining internal components, fuel lines made of aluminum tubing, control cables running through pulleys and fair leads, electrical conduits wrapped in protective covering, hydraulic lines, fuel tank mounting brackets. Then comes the riveting operation that will install 78,606 individual rivets into this single wing section. Large aluminum panels, pre-cut to exact dimensions at another station, get positioned over the wing's skeletal structure. Teams of riveters, working from both sides of the wing, use pneumatic guns that hammer at 3,000 impacts per minute to install rivets at precisely specified intervals dictated by engineering drawings. Each rivet represents a specific structural connection. Each rivet must be properly set, with the manufactured head on one side, and the shop head formed by the riveting process on the other side, creating a permanent mechanical fastener that holds specific structural loads and prevents metal fatigue. The work is loud, physically demanding, and absolutely critical. A single loose rivet at 25,000 feet can start a structural failure that kills 10 men. The permanent jig's massive steel framework holds everything absolutely stable during riveting. The wing cannot twist under the hammering forces. It cannot bend as workers move across its surface. It cannot distort as hundreds of rivets get installed, each one creating localized stress. Every rivet seats into undistorted metal held in precise position by the jig. Every fastener achieves proper clamping force. The consistency is mechanical, automatic, inevitable, perfect. When the center wing section is complete, weighing approximately 4,500 pounds with all internal components installed, and 78,606 rivets and 1,000 bolts fastening the structure together, the crane returns. Workers detach alignment pins. The crane lifts the finished assembly straight up and out of the jig in a single smooth motion. The crane swings away toward the next station on the main assembly line where other workers will attach outer wing panels and engine nacelles. The permanent jig stands empty for perhaps 30 minutes while workers clean debris, verify that alignment pins remain properly positioned, check that brackets haven't shifted. Then another rough wing structure arrives from the pre-assembly area and the cycle repeats. The time requirement from placing rough wing structure into the jig to extracting the finished center wing assembly? 1 hour. Not 250 hours. Not even 20 hours. 1 single hour. 60 minutes from rough assembly to completed wing section, ready for the next production station. The reduction isn't incremental improvement through better training or refined techniques. It's complete transformation through fundamental redesign of the manufacturing process at the system level. May 26, 1943. Edsel Ford dies at his home in Grosse Pointe Shores at 1 to 10 a.m., succumbing to metastatic stomach cancer and undulant fever from drinking unpasteurized milk from Ford Farms, where his father insisted on maintaining old-fashioned agricultural practices. Edsel is 49 years old. He has been president of Ford Motor Company for 24 years. He will never see Willow Run reach full production. He will never see vindication of the enormous gamble he supported against withering criticism. His death devastates the Ford family and the company. 6 days later, Henry Ford announces to the board of directors that he, at age 79 and increasingly irrational, will return as president of the company he founded 40 years earlier. The decision alarms everyone who understands Henry's mental condition. President Franklin Roosevelt's administration becomes concerned enough that they consider putting Ford Motor Company under government control. April 1943. Just weeks before Edsall's death, the permanent jig system begins full operation. Production numbers that had crawled upward at glacial pace suddenly accelerate dramatically, miraculously. January's production totaled 37 B-24 seconds. February reaches 70 aircraft. March climbs to 96 bombers. April delivers 146 completed Liberators to the Army Air Forces for combat operations. The wing jig innovation enables everything else by eliminating the critical bottleneck that had constrained the entire production sequence. With center wing assembly no longer limiting production, other bottlenecks become manageable through incremental improvements. Sub-assembly lines synchronize their timing. Parts arrive exactly when needed because demand becomes predictable instead of chaotic. Workers develop rhythm and muscle memory as operations repeat with mechanical regularity. The entire factory begins operating as Sorensen originally envisioned 2 years earlier, like a massive mechanical organism where every component moves in coordinated harmony, like a symphony orchestra following a conductor. The permanent jig's impact extends far beyond production speed. Quality improves dramatically, measurably. Every B-24 center wing that passes through the permanent jig emerges with identical dimensions to within thousandths of an inch across its entire 55-foot span. Leading-edge curvature matches aerodynamic specifications with precision that exceeds Consolidated's handcrafted results achieved by master craftsmen. Rivet spacing follows perfect geometric patterns. Structural strength exceeds engineering requirements because the jig prevents the subtle distortions that plagued temporary wooden frames warping in California sunshine. Army Air Forces inspectors initially distrust this mass-produced precision. They arrive at Willow Run expecting to find corners cut, specifications compromised, and safety margins reduced to achieve speed. Instead, they discover something that challenges everything they believe about aircraft quality. Ford's permanent jig produces more consistent, more reliable wings than Consolidated's artisan approach. The statistics prove undeniable. Rejection rates fall from 40% to under 10%. Rework requirements drop proportionally. Combat squadrons stop complaining about Ford-built B-24 seconds being inferior to Consolidated-built aircraft. The reason is counterintuitive and reveals deep truth about manufacturing quality that will influence industrial philosophy for decades. Custom jigs, built from wood and steel brackets for each individual bomber, introduce variation between aircraft. Temperature changes cause wood to expand and contract by fractions of inches. Repeated assembly and disassembly loosens joints over time. Different craftsmen build slightly different temporary structures based on their training, experience, and individual techniques. These small variations accumulate like compound interest. Wings built in temporary jigs differ minutely from each other in ways that affect performance, maintenance, and longevity. Ford's permanent steel jig, anchored to the factory floor and maintained to machine tool tolerances by dedicated technicians, eliminates these variables completely. The alignment pins occupy precisely the same positions in three-dimensional space for bomber number 100 and bomber number 1000. The steel brackets don't warp in heat. They don't loosen through repeated use. They don't drift over time. The jig becomes a three-dimensional template that stamps perfect mechanical consistency onto every wing section that passes through it. Senator Truman returns to Willow Run in June 1943, 6 weeks after Edsall Ford's death. The plant he had criticized so harshly just 4 months earlier has been transformed. He watches wings moving through the permanent jig system with mechanical precision, observing how quickly the massive steel framework receives rough wing structures, processes them with automated consistency, and releases finished assemblies. He asks Sorensen how Ford achieved this breakthrough that eluded every experienced aircraft manufacturer in America. Sorensen's answer is characteristically direct, blunt, unvarnished. We stopped building jigs and started building one jig. We stopped thinking about custom solutions for each bomber and started thinking about standardized processing for every bomber. We stopped asking how aircraft have always been built since the Wright brothers and started asking how aircraft should be built using everything we've learned about manufacturing in the 40 years since. The permanent jig concept spreads rapidly beyond center wing assembly like a virus, finding susceptible hosts. Sorensen's engineers designed similar systems for outer wing sections, reducing assembly time from days to hours. They create permanent jigs for tail assemblies, for engine nacelles, for bomb bay structures. Each jig follows the same philosophy: massive, permanent, precision-engineered, designed to receive components rather than confine their construction. The approach transforms Willow Run into something unprecedented in aerospace manufacturing, a facility where complex four-engine bombers emerge from standardized processes that look more like automobile production than traditional aircraft assembly. November 1943. Willow Run celebrates completion of its 1000th B-24 Liberator. Production that year totals nearly 4,000 aircraft, more than Consolidated Aircraft built in its entire 20-year corporate history up to that point. The permanent jig system processes center wings so efficiently that the station frequently stands idle, waiting for rough wing structures to arrive from the pre-assembly area. The bottleneck has moved elsewhere in the production sequence. The jig itself is no longer the constraint. The workforce that builds these aircraft represents a profound transformation in American industrial demographics that will have implications extending decades beyond the war's end. By end of 1943, Willow Run employs 42,331 workers. Approximately one-third are women, roughly 14,000 female workers performing every job from clerical work to riveting to crane operation. Many have never worked in a factory before. They were secretaries, teachers, housewives, farm workers, just months earlier. They arrive from all 48 states, from Hawaii, Puerto Rico, Canada, even Latin America. They come seeking wages that seem impossibly high compared to Depression-era incomes. Women earn the same 85 cents per hour as men for the same work, a revolutionary policy in 1943 America where gender wage gaps were openly accepted. A woman riveter working 54-hour weeks, the standard wartime schedule with time and a half pay after 40 hours, earns approximately $50 weekly. Annual income reaches $2,600, more money than many have seen in their entire lives. The housing crisis becomes acute, overwhelming. Ypsilanti, a small college town of approximately 12,000 people before the war, suddenly needs to accommodate tens of thousands of workers. By early 1942, no rental rooms exist within 15 miles of Willow Run. Resourceful landlords rent rooms in shifts, collecting double or triple rent. While one tenant works the day shift, another sleeps in the same bed working night shift. Hot bunking, borrowed from maritime practice. The federal government eventually responds by building Willow Run Village and Willow Run Lodge on land purchased from Henry Ford. Construction begins in early 1943 using prefabricated building components. The first dormitory opens in February 1943, containing 1,900 rooms housing 3,000 single workers. Between June and December 1943, workers complete 2,500 family housing units, small flat-top structures with crude coal stoves and ice boxes instead of refrigerators. By end of 1943, these federal housing projects shelter 15,000 people, roughly equal to Ypsilanti's entire pre-war population. An instant city rising from farmland, complete with commercial buildings, laundries, schools, police, and fire stations. Many workers still live in converted gas stations, shacks, tents, or trailer homes. Some families sleep in their cars in the parking lot. April 1944. Willow Run reaches peak production, completing 428 B-24 Liberators in a single month. That's one bomber rolling off the assembly line every 63 minutes, sustained across 2 9-hour shifts operating 6 days per week, maintained month after month. The pace seems impossible by traditional aerospace standards, where master craftsmen spent weeks on individual components. At Willow Run, it's simply normal Tuesday production. Between April 24th and April 26th, a span of just 48 hours, 100 completed bombers fly away from Willow Run's adjacent airfield. Army Air Force's pilots, who have been sleeping on 1,300 cots in dormitories near the hangars, conduct quick flight checks, then ferry the bombers to modification centers, where military-specific equipment gets installed: guns, bomb sights, radios, specialized electronics. The achievement makes national newsreels. Life magazine publishes photo essays. The permanent jig for center wing assembly processes wings so rapidly that it achieves approximately 20% idle time, standing empty, waiting for the next rough assembly to arrive. 20% idle time on the critical bottleneck station. In traditional manufacturing, this would represent inefficiency, wasted capacity, poor planning. At Willow Run, it proves the bottleneck no longer constrains the system. The jig can process wings faster than the entire rest of the factory can supply them. The permanent jig, the innovation that aviation experts called impossible, has become so efficient it waits on other operations. The transformation is complete. The blacksmith has made the watch. The aviation industry watches with something between admiration and horror. Admiration because Willow Run's output dwarfs every other B-24 facility combined. Ford builds nearly half of all Liberators produced. Horror because the permanent jig system makes decades of accumulated aircraft manufacturing expertise suddenly completely obsolete overnight. The craftsmen who spent years learning to build temporary jigs, the engineers who refined wooden framework designs across aircraft generations, the supervisors who managed custom assembly processes, all discover their specialized knowledge has lost value like Confederate currency after Appomattox. Boeing studies Ford's approach and begins designing permanent jigs for B-29 Superfortress production at its new facility in Wichita, Kansas. Lockheed investigates similar systems for P-38 Lightning fighter manufacturing. Douglas Aircraft sends engineers to Willow Run with cameras, notebooks, measuring tools to document the wing jig system in exhaustive, obsessive detail, copying everything. By mid-1944, permanent jig designs are spreading through American aerospace manufacturing like an epidemic, jumping from facility to facility, company to company. But the implications extend far beyond America's wartime mobilization. The permanent jig concept challenges fundamental assumptions about manufacturing complex products that will reshape industrial philosophy worldwide. Before Willow Run, conventional wisdom held that complexity required customization. High-precision products needed individual attention from skilled craftsmen using techniques adapted to each unit's unique characteristics. Mass production might work for simple items like automobiles or refrigerators, but precision aerospace components demanded artisan approaches, individual judgment, accumulated wisdom. Sorensen's permanent jig proves the opposite with mathematical certainty. Complexity benefits from standardization. High-precision products need consistent processes that eliminate variation rather than accommodate it. The path to quality isn't through custom adaptation for each unit based on craftsman judgment. It's through building systems so precise, so mechanically perfect, that every product receives identical treatment that exceeds what human hands can achieve through skill alone. Each B-24 that rolled off Willow Run's assembly line contained approximately 450,000 individual parts. 313,237 rivets in 520 different sizes held the airframe together. The center wing section alone, the component processed through the permanent jig, consisted of 6,439 individual parts, fastened together with 78,606 rivets and 1,000 bolts. The finished center wing weighed approximately 4,500 pounds, light enough for crane handling but heavy enough to require structural precision. A special forging department inside Willow Run churned out 7 million rivets daily in those 520 different sizes, operating around the clock. The scale of parts management alone exceeded anything traditional aircraft manufacturers had imagined possible or attempted. Yet the permanent jig system brought order to this chaos. Each wing received the same treatment in the same jig using the same procedures. Each rivet went into the same location determined by the jig's geometry. Each structural member occupied the same position in three-dimensional space. The workers who operated the permanent jig system came from backgrounds that would have shocked pre-war aviation executives. Flora Myers worked fingerprinting new employees as a wartime security measure, then transferred to telephone operations, calling cleanup crews when accidental spills occurred. Johanna Wieser, who would later become assistant dean of University of Michigan's School of Nursing, worked as a librarian in the Ford Airplane School, where new workers learned skills like riveting in compressed 2-week courses. Helen Mast ran her husband's shoe store alone while he served overseas, selling hard-toed protective shoes to women workers. She remembered customers who had never worn shoes before arriving at Willow Run from rural areas, who had to be taught how to walk in them, how to lace them, how to break them in without creating blisters that would prevent factory work. These workers, dismissed by aviation experts as unqualified and incompetent, operated the most advanced aircraft manufacturing system in the world. They proved that complex manufacturing could be democratized, that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary results when systems were designed to enable their success rather than require their expertise. June 28, 1945. The final B-24 Liberator rolls off Willow Run's assembly line. The factory built 8,685 bombers in less than 4 years of production, accounting for 47% of total B-24 production across all manufacturers worldwide. Of those 8,685 aircraft, every single center wing section passed through the permanent jig system. The physical count, 8,685 wings, processed through one massive steel framework that never wore out, never distorted, never failed. The permanent jig itself, that massive steel framework that revolutionized aircraft manufacturing and proved Dutch Kindleberger wrong about blacksmiths and watches, gets dismantled when the factory converts to automobile production in late 1945. The steel goes to scrap yards where it's melted down and recycled into other products, perhaps automobile frames or construction beams. The precision alignment pins get lost in surplus equipment auctions, scattered across the Midwest to small machine shops and hobbyists. The physical jig disappears as completely as if it never existed, as if Sorensen never sketched it on Hotel del Coronado stationery. But the concept spreads like wind-borne seeds taking root in fertile ground across the industrial landscape. Post-war aircraft manufacturers design their factories around permanent jig systems as standard practice, no longer questioning whether it works, but only how to implement it most effectively. When Boeing builds the 707 jet airliner in the 1950s, introducing commercial jet travel to the masses, the fuselage sections move through permanent jigs that hold components during assembly. When Lockheed constructs the C-5A Galaxy Heavy Transport in the 1960s, the largest aircraft of its era, massive permanent jigs form the foundation of their production system, enabling construction of a plane that dwarfs the B-24. When Airbus establishes its manufacturing operations in Europe during the 1970s, creating a competitor to Boeing's dominance, permanent jigs become central to their design philosophy from day one. The Airbus, a 380, the largest passenger airliner ever built with capacity for over 500 passengers, moves through permanent jig systems that trace their conceptual lineage directly back to Sorensen's breakthrough at Willow Run. Engineers designing those jigs studied Willow Run's history, read technical reports from the 1940s, understood they were implementing a proven solution. The permanent jig concept extends beyond aerospace into industries Sorensen never imagined. Shipbuilders adopt it for fabricating hull sections, eliminating the traditional practice of building entire ships on slipways from keel to superstructure. Modern shipyards prefabricate sections in permanent jigs, then assemble complete vessels in days rather than months. Construction equipment manufacturers use permanent jigs for assembling bulldozer frames and crane booms, achieving precision that hand-fitting could never match. Anyone producing large, complex products with tight tolerances eventually discovers what Sorensen sketched on hotel stationery in December 1940. Build the jig once and move the product through it. September 1945. World War II ends with Japan's surrender. Within weeks, Willow Run's transformation begins. The workforce that peaked at 42,000 in early 1945 falls to fewer than 10,000 by December. The massive factory stands mostly empty, echoing with memories of round-the-clock production. Production lines that ran continuously for 3 years go silent for the first time since 1942. Ford declines to purchase the facility it built with government funding, having no interest in maintaining such a massive structure for peacetime automobile production. Kaiser Frazer Corporation, an upstart automobile manufacturer formed by industrialist Henry Kaiser, who applied similar mass production techniques to Liberty ship construction, moves into Willow Run in 1946. They produce approximately 739,000 automobiles at the facility between 1947 and 1953, before the company collapses financially and operations move to Toledo, Ohio. General Motors eventually purchases Willow Run, using it to build transmissions and later automobiles, including Chevrolet Corvair and Nova models through the 1960s. Charles Sorensen, the man whose hotel room sketches revolutionized aircraft manufacturing and validated mass production of complex precision products, retires from Ford in March 1944 after a bitter power struggle with Henry Ford II, who assumed increasing control as his grandfather's mental condition deteriorated. Sorensen is 62 years old, at the height of his capabilities, forced out by company politics rather than declining performance. He becomes president of Willys Overland Motors, where he applies his production expertise to transforming military jeeps into civilian vehicles, developing the Jeepster, a forerunner to modern sport utility vehicles. He retires to Florida and the U.S. Virgin Islands, living comfortably on savings and investments from his Ford years. He dies in August 1968, at age 86, in Bethesda, Maryland. No major newspapers run obituaries beyond brief death notices. No television networks report his passing. No industry organizations hold memorial services. The man who revolutionized aircraft manufacturing with a simple insight about jigs, who enabled Allied victory through industrial innovation, who proved that expertise could be systematized and craft tradition could be improved through engineering, fades into historical obscurity like morning fog burning off under sunshine. His name appears in automotive history books as Henry Ford's production chief, the man who helped develop the moving assembly line. His contribution to aerospace manufacturing goes largely unrecognized outside specialized engineering circles and academic studies. The permanent jig, his greatest innovation, becomes so universal that nobody remembers who invented it, like nobody remembers who first put wheels on luggage or who invented the barcode. Successful innovations disappear into infrastructure, becoming invisible through ubiquity. Any modern aircraft factory today, any facility that produces planes at scale, any manufacturing complex where wings get built and assembled, and you'll find permanent jigs everywhere. Not wooden frames constructed for individual aircraft like Consolidated built in California sunshine, not temporary fixtures dismantled after each use like traditional shipwrights employed for centuries. Massive steel structures, some weighing hundreds of tons, anchored to factory floors with foundation systems extending meters into earth, precisely aligned using laser measurement systems accurate to fractions of millimeters, designed to receive components and hold them during processing with mechanical perfection. Boeing's Everett facility in Washington state, the largest building by volume in the world, where 747 and 787 aircraft are assembled, uses permanent jigs throughout the production sequence for every major airframe component. Each jig represents decades of refinement, incorporating lessons learned from Willow Run forward, but the fundamental concept remains unchanged. Build the jig once, make it precise, move the product through it, achieve consistency through mechanical systems rather than human skill. Airbus's Toulouse complex in France, where A320 and A350 aircraft are manufactured, relies on permanent jig systems for every major airframe section, from nose cones to tail assemblies. The jigs use hydraulic clamps controlled by computers instead of manual brackets, laser alignment systems instead of steel pins, but the philosophy traces directly to Sorensen's innovation. The jig is permanent, the product moves. Consistency comes from system design. Lockheed Martin's Fort Worth plant in Texas, producing F-35 Lightning II fighters, the most advanced combat aircraft in service, employs permanent jigs. designed using the same fundamental principles Sorensen pioneered 80 years earlier: stealth coatings and composite. Materials require even tighter tolerances than aluminum structures, making permanent jigs more critical than ever. Modern aerospace manufacturing depends completely on Sorensen's insight. The economic impact of the permanent jig concept exceeds measurement or calculation with any precision. Every reduction in aircraft manufacturing time translates directly to cost savings that compound across decades. Every improvement in consistency reduces defect rates and rework expenses. Every increase in production capacity expands what's possible in aerospace engineering, enabling designs that couldn't be manufactured profitably using traditional methods. The accumulated savings across 8 decades of aircraft production likely exceeds hundreds of billions of dollars in modern currency. Consider the mathematics expanding from Willow Run's initial breakthrough. Consolidated's temporary jig approach required 250 man-hours per center wing. At 1940 wartime labor rates of approximately $1 per hour, that's $250 in direct labor costs per wing, not including materials or overhead. Ford's permanent jig reduces time to 1 hour. Labor cost per wing falls to $1. The savings is $249 per wing, a 99.6% reduction in direct labor. Multiply that by 8,685 B-24 seconds built at Willow Run. The labor savings on center wings alone exceeds $2 million in wartime currency, approximately $36 million in 2025 dollars, accounting for inflation, and that's just one assembly station on one bomber design at one factory during one war. The permanent jig's total economic impact includes every aircraft built worldwide since 1943 using similar systems. Scale those savings across all aircraft manufacturing since Willow Run pioneered the approach. Across B-29s and B-52s that defended America through the Cold War. Across 707 jets and 747s that revolutionized commercial aviation. Across Airbus, 320s, and Boeing 78s that carry billions of passengers annually. Across fighters, transports, helicopters, business jets, all manufactured using permanent jig systems descended from Sorensen's concept. The total savings likely approaches $1 trillion in modern currency, money that purchased additional aircraft, funded research into advanced technologies like jet engines and composite materials, reduced prices for commercial aviation, making air travel accessible to ordinary people. But the permanent jig's greatest legacy isn't economic or technical. It's philosophical, conceptual, transformative. Sorensen proved that the way things have always been done is not necessarily the way things should be done. That tradition can constrain rather than guide. That expertise accumulated over generations can create blindness to better approaches. That sometimes the path to revolutionary improvement requires questioning the fundamental assumptions everyone else accepts without examination, treating settled questions as open problems. Consolidated's aircraft engineers knew how to build B-24 seconds. They had designed the bomber from clean sheets of paper, calculating loads and stresses, testing prototypes, refining systems. They understood its aerodynamics, its structural requirements, its operational characteristics. They possessed expertise that Ford's automobile engineers completely lacked. They had built aircraft for 2 decades while Ford built cars. Yet they couldn't imagine how to build B-24 seconds quickly because their expertise was rooted in methods that assumed customization and craftsmanship, that treated each aircraft as a bespoke product requiring individual attention. Sorensen, who knew nothing about aircraft beyond what he observed during one day at Consolidated's facility, could imagine something different because he wasn't constrained by aviation and tradition. He saw wing assembly not as aerospace engineering, requiring specialized expertise, but as a manufacturing problem requiring systematic solution. And manufacturing problems get solved by standardizing processes, eliminating variation, and designing systems that move products through consistent operations that don't depend on individual skill or judgment. This pattern repeats across industrial history, like a recurring musical theme. Outsiders revolutionize industries because they don't know what's impossible, don't accept conventional limits, don't respect traditional boundaries between possible and impossible. Experts, trapped by accumulated knowledge about existing methods, cannot imagine alternatives that violate principles they learned as fundamental truth, that contradict training that took years to master. Progress comes from those willing to challenge assumptions that everyone else treats as physical law. The permanent jig stands as physical manifestation of this principle, embodying the philosophy in steel and precision. A simple idea, obvious once you see it, impossible to imagine if you're committed to existing approaches. A massive steel framework that replaced thousands of temporary wooden frames and transformed how complex products get manufactured worldwide, across every industry requiring precision assembly. Today, the original permanent jig is gone, scrapped decades ago, melted down, recycled, transformed into something else entirely. But its conceptual descendants fill factories on every continent where complex products are manufactured. And every time an aircraft wing passes through a permanent jig, moving into position with mechanical precision, getting processed according to standardized procedures, emerging complete and consistent with every wing before it and every wing after it. Charles Sorensen's insight from a California hotel room in December 1940 continues working, continues transforming complexity into consistency, continues proving that the best way to build things is often the way nobody has built them before, continues validating the power of questioning expertise, challenging tradition, and believing that impossible simply means nobody has figured out how yet. The story of Willow Run's permanent jig system is ultimately about more than aircraft manufacturing. It's about human potential and organizational systems. It's about how ordinary people achieve extraordinary results when systems are designed to enable their success. It's about how revolutionary improvement comes from questioning assumptions rather than accepting limits. It's about how one man's refusal to accept conventional wisdom transformed an entire industry and influenced manufacturing philosophy worldwide for generations. The workers at Willow Run, dismissed as unqualified by aviation experts, built nearly half of all B-24 Liberators produced during World War II. They weren't superior humans with exceptional capabilities. They were secretaries and farmers and housewives and teachers, ordinary people achieving extraordinary results because someone believed they could and designed systems that enabled their success. Sorensen's permanent jig was one component of that system, but it symbolized the entire philosophy: eliminate variation, standardize processes, enable consistency through mechanical systems rather than depending on individual expertise. That lesson, demonstrated in Willow Run's massive facility between 1943 and 1945, validated by 8,685 completed bombers, it remains relevant wherever industries face challenges that conventional wisdom claims impossible. The permanent jig proved that impossible often means nobody has systematically analyzed the problem, broken it into components, and designed solutions unconstrained by tradition. It proved that revolutionary improvement requires revolutionary thinking, willingness to challenge experts, courage to implement solutions that contradict accumulated wisdom. The Liberty ships are mostly gone now, scrapped decades ago, or resting on ocean floors where German submarines sent them. The B-24 Liberators disappeared even faster, retired immediately after war's end, sent to boneyards where they were cut apart for scrap aluminum. But the revolution they represented endures in every modern factory, in every manufacturing facility that uses standardized processes, in every production system that achieves consistency through mechanical design rather than human skill, and in every engineer who questions whether impossible truly means impossible or simply means we haven't figured out how yet. That is Charles Sorensen's enduring legacy, carved not in steel monuments or bronze statues, but in transformed understanding of what dedicated people can accomplish when freed from the constraints of tradition and challenged to attempt what experts claim cannot be done. From December 1940, when he toured Consolidated's outdoor assembly facility, to June 1945, when the last B-24 rolled off Willow Run's assembly line, Sorensen proved that industrial revolutions happen not through incremental improvements to existing methods, but through fundamental reimagining of what is possible. The permanent jig for B-24 center wing assembly, That massive steel framework that processed 8,685 wings in less than 4 years carried more than structural components through its precision-machined brackets. It carried proof that human ingenuity, when unshackled from tradition and empowered by systematic thinking, can accomplish the seemingly impossible. It proved that craft expertise can be systematized, that complexity can be standardized, and that revolutionary improvement comes from questioning every assumption about how things must be done. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your Reg 12 screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.